Victoria Ashford had everything money could buy: a mansion, designer clothes, luxury cars, and the kind of life most people only dream about. But on one ordinary afternoon, when she walked into her nursery and saw her black maid, Grace, breastfeeding her infant son, something inside her shattered. What happened next didn't just change Grace's life. It changed everything Victoria thought she knew about wealth, privilege, and what it means to truly care for someone you love. Let me take you back to where this all began. Victoria Ashford wasn't born into wealth. That's something most people didn't know about her. She grew up in a middle-class family in suburban Connecticut, the daughter of a dentist and a high school English teacher. She was smart, ambitious, and hungry for more than what her parents' modest lifestyle could offer. By the time she was 25, she had graduated from Columbia Business School and landed a position at one of Manhattan's top investment firms. By 32, she had married Richard Ashford, heir to a pharmaceutical fortune, and stepped into a world of country clubs, charity galas, and summer homes in the Hamptons. Now, at 37, Victoria had a life that looked perfect from the outside. A sprawling estate in Westchester County, a personal trainer, a chef, a driver, and after years of struggling with fertility treatments, a beautiful baby boy named Christopher, who had just turned 4 months old. But perfection, as Victoria was learning, came with a price she hadn't anticipated. Richard worked constantly. His father's company was expanding into emerging markets, and Richard spent more time in boardrooms and on international flights than he did at home. When he was there, he was distracted, scrolling through emails during dinner, taking calls at midnight, treating their home like a hotel where he occasionally slept between business trips. Victoria had thrown herself into motherhood the way she approached everything else in her life, with meticulous planning and high expectations. She had read every parenting book, bought the most expensive crib, the safest car seat, organic cotton harnesses that cost more than most people's monthly grocery bills. She had hired a night nurse for the first 6 weeks, then a full-time nanny when she returned to her part-time consulting work. That nanny was Grace Williams. Grace was 28 years old, originally from Atlanta, with warm brown eyes and a gentle voice that seemed to calm Christopher the moment she spoke to him. She had moved to New York 3 years ago after her youngest sister got accepted to NYU, wanting to be close to the only family she had left after their mother passed away from cancer. Grace had worked as a nanny for 2 other families before the Ashfords, and her references were impeccable. Victoria had hired her after a single interview. There was something about Grace that felt safe, trustworthy, the kind of person who would love Christopher almost as much as Victoria did. And Grace did love him. Anyone could see that. She sang to him while changing his diapers, old gospel songs her mother used to sing. She talked to him constantly, narrating everything she was doing, convinced that babies understood more than people gave them credit for. She never checked her phone when she was holding him, never seemed rushed or annoyed, even when Christopher screamed for hours during his colicky phase. Victoria was grateful for Grace. Truly, she was. But there was also something else there, something Victoria didn't like to acknowledge even to herself. Jealousy. Because Christopher smiled at Grace first. Because when he was fussy, Grace could soothe him in minutes, while Victoria sometimes struggled for an hour. Because when Victoria came home from her office, Christopher would light up when Grace walked into the room, and sometimes barely seemed to notice his own mother. Victoria told herself she was being ridiculous. Grace was doing her job, and doing it well. That's what Victoria was paying her for. It was a good thing that Christopher felt secure and loved, even when Victoria couldn't be there every minute of every day. But the jealousy lingered, a small dark seed that Victoria tried to ignore. If you've ever felt like you're failing at something that's supposed to come naturally, like everyone else has figured out some secret you were never told, then you know exactly what Victoria was feeling during those early months of motherhood. If you're already hooked by this story, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe, because what happens next will shock you. The day everything changed started like any other Tuesday in late September. Victoria had a consultation call with a client at 10 in the morning, scheduled to last about an hour. Grace had Christopher upstairs in the nursery, and Victoria could hear singing softly through the baby monitor on her desk as she reviewed quarterly reports and prepared her notes. The call ended 15 minutes early. The client had to leave for another meeting, and Victoria found herself with unexpected free time. She closed her laptop and decided to go upstairs to spend time with Christopher before lunch. She wanted to see him smile. to hold him, to feel like his mother instead of just the woman who paid everyone else to take care of him. She climbed the stairs quietly, not wanting to disturb whatever peaceful moment Grace had created. The nursery door was slightly ajar, and Victoria pushed it open gently, and then she froze. Grace was sitting in the rocking chair by the window, the same chair where Victoria had spent countless sleepless nights trying to get Christopher to latch properly, trying to breastfeed him the way all the books said was best, the way that was supposed to create an unbreakable bond between mother and child. Grace was breastfeeding Christopher. Victoria's son was cradled in Grace's arms, nursing contentedly, making the small, satisfied sounds that Victoria had only heard a handful of times when she tried to breastfeed him herself. Grace's eyes were closed, her expression peaceful, almost reverent. She was humming softly, and Christopher's tiny hand rested against her skin. The world tilted. Victoria couldn't breathe, couldn't speak, couldn't process what she was seeing. This was her son, her body, her choice, her motherhood. And Grace, who she had trusted, who she had welcomed into her home, who she paid generously and treated well, was doing something so intimate, so personal, so fundamentally maternal that Victoria felt like she had been physically struck. "What are you doing?" The words came out as a whisper. Grace's eyes flew open, and the color drained from her face. "Mrs. Ashford, What are you doing?" Victoria's voice was louder now, shaking with an emotion she couldn't even name. Rage, betrayal, horror. Grace stood up quickly, adjusting her clothing, holding Christopher close. The baby started to cry, sensing the tension in the room. "Mrs. Ashford, please, let me explain." "Explain? What is there to explain? You're breastfeeding my son, my son, without my permission, without even asking me." Victoria crossed the room in 3 strides and took Christopher from Grace's arms. The baby wailed, his face turning red, his small body rigid with distress. Victoria held him against her chest, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might explode. "I need you to leave," Victoria said, her voice cold now. "Pack your things. Leave my house. Now. Please, Mrs. Ashford, if you would just let me. Now." Grace flinched. Tears were streaming down her face, but she didn't argue. She nodded once, then walked quickly from the room, her shoulders shaking. Victoria stood there holding Christopher, who continued to scream, his cries echoing off the pale blue walls of the nursery. She tried to comfort him, rocking him the way Grace did, making soothing sounds, but Christopher wouldn't calm down. He arched his back, his face contorted with misery. And for the first time since he was born, Victoria broke down completely. She sank into the rocking chair and sobbed, clutching her son, feeling like the worst mother in the world and not even understanding why. Hit that subscribe button if you want to see how this story unfolds, because the truth behind what Victoria discovered will change everything you think you know about this situation. For the next 24 hours, Victoria was a wreck. She called Richard, but he was in Singapore and barely seemed to grasp the severity of what she was telling him. She was breastfeeding him, like, with her own. "That's weird, Vic. Yeah, that's definitely not okay. Just fire her and hire someone else. I'll be home Friday. We'll figure it out then." He didn't get it. How could he? He wasn't there. He hadn't seen it. Victoria couldn't shake the image from her mind. Grace's peaceful expression, Christopher's contentment, the casual intimacy of the moment, as if it was something that had happened before, as if it was routine. How long had this been going on? The question tormented her. She replayed every interaction with Grace, looking for clues. Had Grace been secretly breastfeeding Christopher this whole time? For weeks, months. Victoria had stopped trying to breastfeed after 6 weeks. Christopher had struggled to latch, and Victoria's milk supply never seemed adequate. She had pumped obsessively, drank the teas, took the supplements, worked with a lactation consultant, but nothing helped. Eventually, exhausted and defeated, she had switched to formula. The lactation consultant had assured her that formula was fine, that fed was best, that she shouldn't feel guilty. But Victoria did feel guilty. She felt like she had failed at the most basic biological function of motherhood. And now, apparently, Grace had succeeded where Victoria had failed. The rage returned, hot and sharp. Victoria spent the day caring for Christopher alone. The baby was fussy without Grace, crying more than usual, refusing to settle. Victoria tried everything, bouncing him, singing to him, giving him a pacifier. But nothing worked as well as Grace's methods had. By evening, Victoria was exhausted. She called her mother, desperate for support. "Mom, something happened. Something. I don't even know how to describe it." "What is it, sweetheart? Is Christopher okay?" "Christopher is fine. It's Grace. The nanny. I found her. She was breastfeeding him, Mom. She was breastfeeding my son." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. She was what? Breastfeeding him. I walked in, and she had him in the rocking chair, and she was nursing him, without asking me, without telling me, just doing it. "Oh, Victoria." Her mother's voice was thick with shock. I don't even know what to say. That's a complete violation. Did you fire her?" "Yes. Immediately. I told her to leave." "Good. That's good. You can't have someone in your home who would do something like that without your consent. That's crossing so many boundaries I can't even count them." Victoria felt validated by her mother's reaction, but the validation didn't ease the strange ache in her chest. "Mom, what if she's been doing it for a while? Then she's even more manipulative than I thought." "Victoria, listen to me. You did the right thing. You protected your son and your family. Now you need to find a new nanny, someone with proper boundaries, and move forward." Victoria wanted to move forward. She really did. But something kept pulling her back to that moment in the nursery. Something beyond the violation, beyond the anger. The look on Grace's face. She hadn't looked guilty or sneaky. She had looked loving, peaceful, like she was doing something sacred. And Christopher had been so content. Make sure you're subscribed because the next part of this story is going to completely shift your perspective on what really happened. That night, Victoria couldn't sleep. She lay in bed next to Richard's empty side. He wouldn't be home for 3 more days, and stared at the ceiling, her mind racing. Why would Grace do this? What possible reason could she have? Victoria knew Grace wasn't trying to steal Christopher or replace her. That was absurd. Grace was a professional, a good person. She had never given any indication of instability or inappropriate attachment. So why? At 2 in the morning, Victoria got out of bed and went to her office. She opened her laptop and did something she wasn't proud of. She went through the emails Grace had sent her over the past 4 months. There weren't many. Grace usually communicated in person or through brief text messages about Christopher's schedule, but there were a few. Most were mundane updates. Times for doctor's appointments. Notes about when Christopher had started sleeping through specific noise. Requests to order more diapers or baby food. But then Victoria found one from 6 weeks ago. The subject line was, "Important information about Christopher." Victoria opened it. "Dear Mrs. Ashford, I wanted to let you know about something I've observed with Christopher over the past week. He's been having more difficulty with the formula, more gas, some spitting up, and he seems uncomfortable after feedings. I did some research and I think he might have a sensitivity to the brand we're currently using. I've attached some articles about hypoallergenic formulas that might work better for him. I also wanted to mention that I've been supplementing with some of my own milk. I know this is unusual, and I should have asked you first. I'm so sorry. It started last week when he was especially fussy and wouldn't take the bottle, and I just wanted to help him feel better. I have a 6-month-old niece I'm still nursing when I see her on weekends, so my supply is good. I made sure to get tested recently. I've attached my health screening results, and everything came back clear. I completely understand if this makes you uncomfortable. I should have asked permission first. I just wanted to be honest with you about what I've been doing and why. Please let me know how you'd like me to proceed. Grace." Victoria stated the email. The date was 6 weeks ago. She had never seen this email before. How was that possible? She checked her spam folder. There it was, along with 3 follow-up emails from Grace, each one asking if Victoria had received the previous message, each one expressing concern and apologizing again for not asking first. The spam filter had caught them all because of the attachments, the medical articles, and the health screening results. Grace had tried to tell her. She had tried to ask permission, to explain, to be transparent. And Victoria had never seen it. Victoria felt sick. She read through the emails again, then opened the attachments. The medical screening showed Grace was healthy, no diseases, no infections, nothing that would put Christopher at risk. The articles about hypoallergenic formula were from reputable medical sources. Victoria pulled up Christopher's pediatric EN records on her phone. She scrolled back to the appointment 6 weeks ago. The notes mentioned that Christopher had been having digestive issues with his formula, and that they had discussed switching brands. Victoria had been at that appointment. She remembered the conversation vaguely, but she had been distracted by work emails, by Richard's upcoming trip to London, by the stress of managing everything alone. The pediatric EN had suggested trying a different formula, but the new brand was expensive and had to be special ordered. Victoria had meant to order it but had forgotten, overwhelmed by everything else on her plate. Grace must have noticed that Christopher was still on the old formula, still uncomfortable, and had decided to help the only way she knew how. The realization hit Victoria like a physical blow. Grace hadn't been trying to replace her. Grace had been trying to take care of Christopher when he was in distress and when the solution Victoria had intended to implement had fallen through the cracks. And Victoria had fired her without letting her explain. If you think this story is taking an unexpected turn, wait until you hear what Victoria does next. Hit that like button to support this channel. Victoria didn't sleep at all that night. By morning, she had made a decision. She called Grace at 7 a.m. The phone rang 4 times before Grace answered, her voice wary. Hello. Grace, it's Victoria Ashford. Please don't hang up. There was a long pause. Mrs. Ashford, I understand if you're calling to discuss final payment or references. I'm calling to apologize, Victoria said, her voice cracking. I found your emails. The ones from 6 weeks ago. They went to my spam folder. I never saw them. I never knew you were trying to tell me what you were doing or why. Another pause. Victoria could hear Grace breathing on the other end of the line. I should have tried harder to reach you, Grace said quietly. I should have said something in person. I was afraid you would think I was overstepping. I was afraid you'd be angry that I noticed things you hadn't, or that I was judging your choices. I never wanted to make you feel like you weren't a good mother, Mrs. Ashford. Because you are. Christopher is so lucky to have you. Victoria's eyes filled with tears. I fired you because I thought you were trying to replace me. I thought. God, I don't even know what I thought. I was so jealous of how good you were with him, how much he loved you, and when I saw you breastfeeding him, it felt like proof that I was failing at everything. You're not failing, Grace said, her own voice thick with emotion. You're an amazing mother. Christopher adores you. He lights up when you come home. The reason he's so happy and healthy is because you made sure he had everything he needed, including someone to take care of him when you couldn't be there. That's not failure. That's love. Victoria sobbed openly now. Grace, I'm so sorry. Would you be willing to come back? I know I don't deserve it after how I treated you. But Christopher misses you. And I miss you too. Mrs. Ashford. Victoria. Please call me Victoria. Victoria, Grace said softly. I would be happy to come back. But only if we can start over with complete honesty. No more confusion. No more assumptions. If I have concerns or ideas, I'll tell you directly. And if something makes you uncomfortable, you'll tell me. We have to be a team for Christopher's sake. Yes, Victoria said immediately. Yes, that's exactly what I want. Subscribe and turn on notifications because this story is about to teach all of us something profound about motherhood, class, and what it really means to care for a child. Grace returned to work 2 days later. When she arrived, Victoria was waiting at the door. The two women looked at each other for a long moment, and then Victoria did something she had never done before. She hugged Grace. Thank you for coming back, Victoria whispered. Thank you for giving me a second chance. Grace hugged her back. We all deserve second chances. Over the next few weeks, something shifted in the Ashford household. Victoria and Grace began having long conversations, real conversations, not just the polite exchanges they had shared before. They talked about Christopher's development, about the best ways to establish routines, about the challenges of balancing work and motherhood. But they also talked about other things. About Grace's sister, who was thriving at NYU and planned to become a social worker. About Victoria's own childhood, her complicated relationship with ambition and success. about Grace's mother, who had died when Grace was 24, and how Grace still missed her every single day. Victoria learned that Grace sent most of her paycheck back to Atlanta to help her grandmother, who had raised Grace and her sister after their father left. She learned that Grace was studying online to become a registered nurse, taking classes late at night after Christopher was asleep. She learned that Grace had dreams of opening a community health center in underserved neighborhoods one day, a place where mothers could get the support and education they needed regardless of their income. And as Victoria learned these things, she began to see Grace not just as an employee, but as a person. A whole, complex, brilliant person with her own story, her own struggles, her own hopes. She also began to see herself differently. Victoria had always prided herself on being fair and generous with her staff. She paid well, offered good benefits, treated everyone with basic courtesy. But she realized now that there was a difference between being a good employer and actually seeing the people who worked for you as equals, as humans deserving of respect and understanding beyond their utility in your life. One evening, about 3 weeks after Grace returned, Victoria was in the kitchen making tea when Grace came downstairs after putting Christopher to bed. "He's out cold," Grace said with a smile. "I swear that boy could sleep through a tornado." Victoria laughed. "He gets that from Richard, apparently. I'm a light sleeper." Grace hesitated, then asked, "Can I make a cup of tea too? Or would you prefer?" "Grace, this is your home too when you're here. You don't have to ask permission to make tea." Grace smiled and filled the kettle. They stood together in comfortable silence for a moment, and then Victoria said, "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "When you were breastfeeding Christopher that day, the day I walked in, were you thinking about your own baby? Your niece, I mean?" Grace turned to face her, surprised by the question. She thought for a moment before answering. "Yes and no," she said slowly. "I was thinking about my niece, Mia, because I nurse her when I visit on weekends. But I was also just thinking about Christopher, about how much I love him, about how lucky I am to be part of his life." She paused. "I know he's not my child. I've never confused that. But love doesn't have limits, you know? The love I feel for Christopher doesn't take away from the love you feel for him. It just adds to the love in his life." Victoria felt tears prick her eyes. "I was so jealous of you," she admitted. "I felt like you were better at being his mother than I was." "That's not true, Victoria. And even if I was better at some specific tasks, which I'm not, that wouldn't make me his mother. You're his mother. That bond is irreplaceable. I'm the village. You know the saying, it takes a village to raise a child. I'm part of your village." The words settled into Victoria's heart like a key finding its lock. It takes a village. All her life, Victoria had operated on the principle of self-sufficiency. She had achieved everything through her own intelligence, her own work ethic, her own determination. She had never liked asking for help, never liked admitting that she couldn't handle something alone. But motherhood wasn't something you could do alone. Nobody could. The women who looked like they were doing it perfectly, the ones with the Instagram-ready lives and the perpetual smiles, they all had help too. Nannies, grandparents, friends, communities. The difference was whether you acknowledged that help, whether you valued it, whether you recognized the humanity of the people who provided it. Victoria had been so focused on being a perfect mother that she had forgotten to be a grateful one. "Thank you, Grace," Victoria said quietly, "for being part of our village, for caring about Christopher the way you do, for coming back after I was so horrible to you." "You weren't horrible. You were scared. And fear makes all of us act in ways we're not proud of." Comment below if you've ever misjudged someone and later realized you were completely wrong. Your stories matter. And make sure you like this video if you're feeling the emotion of this moment. Richard came home that Friday, exactly as he had promised. Victoria met him at the door, and for the first time in months, she didn't immediately launch into complaints about his absence or reports about everything that had gone wrong while he was away. Instead, she said, "We need to talk, really talk, about our life, about Christopher, about what we're doing wrong." Richard looked startled. "Is everything okay? Is Christopher?" "Christopher is fine, but we're not. And if we don't change some things, we're going to lose what matters most." They talked for 3 hours that night, the longest real conversation they'd had in over a year. Victoria told him everything, about finding Grace breastfeeding Christopher, about firing her, about the emails she had missed, about the realizations she had come to. I've been so focused on looking like I have everything under control that I haven't been honest about how much I'm struggling, Victoria admitted. And I think you've been doing the same thing. We're both trying to be perfect at everything, and we're failing at the things that actually matter. Richard was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "My father called me last week. He wants me to take over the Asia-Pacific division. It would mean moving to Singapore for at least 3 years." Victoria's stomach dropped. "What did you tell him?" "I told him I'd think about it. That I needed to talk to you first." "And what do you want to do?" Richard looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time in what felt like forever. "I want to be a father to my son. I want to be a husband to my wife. I want to be here for the first words and the first steps and the bedtime stories. I don't want to be the guy who achieves everything professionally and then wakes up at 60 and realizes he missed his whole life." Victoria felt something break open inside her chest. "Then don't be that guy." "But my father." "Your father will find someone else. There are 1,000 ambitious executives who would kill for that position. But Christopher only has one father, and I only have one husband." Richard reached for her hand. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for not being here, for making you carry all of this alone. I'm sorry, too, for not asking for help, for not being honest about how hard it was." They sat together in silence, holding hands, and for the first time in months, Victoria felt like they were actually on the same team. If this story is touching your heart, please take a second to hit that subscribe button. We're about to get to the part that changes everything. Over the next several months, the Ashford family transformed. Richard turned down the Singapore position. He negotiated a different role within his father's company, one that kept him in New York and allowed him to work from home 2 days a week. His father was disappointed, but Richard held firm. "Some things," he said, "were more important than corner offices and executive titles." Victoria reduced her consulting hours and started being more present at home. Not because she thought she had to be there every second. She had learned that lesson. But because she wanted to be. She wanted to see Christopher's development firsthand, to be part of the daily moments that made up his childhood. And Grace continued to be an essential part of their lives. But now the relationship was different. Victoria no longer saw her as just an employee. She saw her as a partner in Christopher's care, as a member of their extended family. Victoria also started paying attention to things she had never noticed before. She noticed that Grace often looked tired in the mornings, and when she asked why, Grace admitted that she was struggling to balance her online nursing classes with her work schedule and weekend visits to her sister and niece. So Victoria adjusted Grace's schedule, giving her 2 full days off each week instead of just 1.5, and she gave her a substantial raise. "You're paying me too much," Grace protested. "I'm paying you what you're worth," Victoria corrected. "And honestly, I've been underpaying you from the beginning. You're not just a nanny, Grace. You're a healthcare provider, an educator, a child development specialist, and a surrogate family member. That deserves proper compensation." Victoria also did something else. She set up a college fund for Grace's niece, Mia, and a scholarship fund for Grace to finish a nursing degree without having to work full-time. When Grace found out, she cried for 20 minutes. "I can't accept this," Grace said, overwhelmed. "You already have," Victoria said gently, "because you've given our family so much more than childcare. You've given us perspective. You've taught us what it means to care for someone selflessly. This is just us trying to give something back." But Victoria didn't stop there. The incident with Grace had opened her eyes to something bigger, the way that domestic workers, particularly women of color, were systematically undervalued and underpaid despite doing some of the most important work in society. Victoria started researching, attending meetings, talking to other nannies and domestic workers. She learned about the exploitation many of them faced, below minimum wage pay, no benefits, no job security, no respect, and she decided to do something about it. Victoria used her business connections and her wealth to establish the Grace Williams Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to providing resources, education, and advocacy for domestic workers. The foundation offered free classes in child development, first aid, and business skills. It connected workers with fair wage employment opportunities. It lobbied for better labor protections and benefits. When Victoria told Grace she was naming the foundation after her, Grace was speechless. "Why would you do this?" Grace asked, tears streaming down her face. "Because you changed my life," Victoria said simply. "You taught me that the most valuable thing we can do with our privilege is to see the people who make our lives possible, really see them, and then use our resources to lift them up." Hit that like button if you believe that every person, regardless of their job or income, deserves to be treated with dignity and respect. The foundation grew quickly. Within a year, it had helped over 500 domestic workers negotiate better contracts, access health care, and pursue education. Within 2 years, it had expanded to 3 other cities. Victoria became a different person through this work. She was still successful, still driven, still ambitious. But her ambitions had shifted. She cared less about impressing her wealthy friends at charity galas and more about the actual impact she was making in people's lives. And Christopher grew up surrounded by love, from his parents, from Grace, and from the extended community of people who had become part of their lives through the foundation. On Christopher's 2nd birthday, Victoria threw a party that would have shocked the old Victoria. Instead of hiring an expensive event planner and inviting the elite families from the country club, she hosted a simple gathering in their backyard. Grace was there with her sister and niece. Several other families from the foundation attended. Richard grilled hamburgers and hot dogs. Christopher smashed a cake and laughed with pure joy. Victoria looked around at the scene and felt something she hadn't felt in years, genuine happiness. That evening, after the guests had left and Christopher was asleep, Victoria found Grace cleaning up the kitchen. "Leave it," Victoria said. "You're not working tonight. Your family." Grace smiled. Force of habit. They stood together, looking out the window at the backyard where remnants of the party remained, deflated balloons, scattered toys, the smudged remains of cake on the picnic table. "Do you remember the day I fired you?" Victoria asked quietly. "Of course. I think about it a lot. About how close I came to losing you. To losing this." She gestured vaguely at everything around them. "I was so caught up in my own fear and insecurity that I almost destroyed something beautiful." Grace turned to face her. "But you didn't. You made a mistake, and then you fixed it. That's what matters." "I don't think I fixed it as much as you forgave it." "Maybe that's the same thing," Grace said thoughtfully. "Maybe fixing mistakes is less about undoing them and more about being willing to learn from them, to grow from them, to become someone who wouldn't make them again." Victoria nodded slowly. "You're very wise, you know that." Grace laughed. "My grandmother used to say that wisdom is just pain that has finished its work on you." "I like that." They stood together in comfortable silence, and Victoria marveled at how much her life had changed. 2 years ago, she would have found this moment impossible to imagine, standing in her kitchen late at night with her son's nanny, not as employer and employee, but as friends, as family. The journey from that awful day in the nursery to this moment of peace hadn't been easy. It had required Victoria to confront her own prejudices, her own insecurities, her own misplaced priorities. It had required her to admit that she didn't have all the answers, that she needed help, that the people she had dismissed as just staff were actually complex, brilliant individuals with their own dreams and worth. But the journey had been worth it, because on the other side of all that discomfort and growth was a life that actually meant something. A life built on connection instead of isolation, on gratitude instead of entitlement, on love instead of fear. If you've made it this far in the story, drop a comment and let me know what lesson you're taking away from Victoria and Grace's journey. And please subscribe because we tell stories like this that challenge us to be better people. 5 years later, Christopher was now 7 years old, thriving in 2nd grade, and obsessed with dinosaurs and soccer. Grace had graduated from nursing school and was working part-time at a community health clinic, while still helping the Ashford family 3 days a week, though her role had evolved. She was less of a nanny now and more of a family friend who happened to pick Christopher up from school and help with homework. The Grace Williams Foundation had become one of the most respected advocacy organizations for domestic workers in the country. Victoria served as its director and poured her energy into expanding its reach and influence. The foundation had helped pass legislation in 3 states guaranteeing domestic workers the right to overtime pay, sick leave, and protections from harassment. Richard had found a balance between his work and his family life. He coached Christopher's soccer team, made it to every school event, and had begun mentoring young fathers through the foundation's family support program. And Victoria had finally made peace with the kind of mother she was. Not perfect, not Instagram ready, but present and loving and honest. She had learned that motherhood wasn't a competition, that there was no prize for doing it alone, that asking for help wasn't weakness, it was wisdom. One afternoon, Victoria was at the foundation office when a young woman came in for an intake interview. She was 23, new to the city, looking for work as a nanny. Her name was Maria, and she had just moved from Texas to help support her family back home. Victoria interviewed her personally, as she often did now. She asked about Maria's experience, her goals, her values. And then she said something she said to every potential hire. The families we work with are looking for more than just childcare. They are looking for partners in raising their children. That means you'll be respected, valued, and compensated fairly. But it also means you need to be honest and communicative. If something is wrong, if a child is struggling, if you have an idea that might help, you speak up. You're not just a pair of hands. You're a professional, and your insights matter. Maria's eyes filled with tears. I've never had anyone talk to me like that before. Like what I do matters. It matters more than most people realize, Victoria said firmly. And I'm going to make sure the family you work with understands that from day one. After Maria left, Victoria sat at her desk and thought about that day 7 years ago when she had walked into the nursery and found Grace breastfeeding Christopher. She thought about the rage she had felt, the betrayal, the fear, and she thought about everything that had come from that moment. If she hadn't walked in that day, she might have continued living her old life, disconnected, lonely, focused on appearances rather than substance. She might never have really known Grace as a person. She might never have started the foundation. She might never have learned what truly mattered. That single moment of discomfort, of having her assumptions challenged and her privilege questioned, had been the catalyst for the most meaningful transformation of her life. Victoria pulled out her phone and texted Grace, "Thank you for breastfeeding my son that day. I know that sounds strange, but it's true. You changed everything for the better." Grace replied a few minutes later, "You changed everything too. You chose to see me. That's the bravest thing anyone has ever done for me." If this story has moved you, I want to ask you to do something. Hit that subscribe button. Yes. Give us a thumbs up. Absolutely. But also, and this is the important part, I want you to think about the people in your life who make your world work. The people who clean your office, who deliver your packages, who teach your kids, who serve your coffee. Do you see them? Really see them? Do you know their names, their stories, their dreams? Because here's what Victoria's story teaches us. We are all connected. The person you dismiss as just the help might be the person who changes your life, who teaches you what love really means, who shows you the difference between looking successful and actually being whole. True wealth isn't measured in bank accounts or square footage. It's measured in the relationships we build, the love we share, the dignity we offer to every single person who crosses our path. Victoria Ashford walked into that nursery with all the privilege and power money could buy. But she walked out of that experience with something much more valuable: humility, compassion, and the understanding that we're all just human beings trying to do our best, trying to love well, trying to matter. Grace Williams had none of Victoria's financial resources, but she had something Victoria desperately needed: the wisdom to love without owning, to give without depleting, to see worth in every person regardless of their tax bracket. Together, they built something beautiful. Not because everything was easy, not because they never made mistakes, but because they chose to see each other's humanity, to forgive each other's failures, and to grow together rather than apart. So here's my challenge to you. Be like the Victoria who chose to listen rather than just react. Be like the Grace who chose to forgive rather than hold a grudge. Be the person who builds bridges instead of walls, who sees people instead of roles, who understands that the smallest acts of dignity and respect can ripple out into movements that change thousands of lives. Because in the end, that's what this story is really about. It's not about breastfeeding or childcare or even about one woman's privilege being checked. It's about what happens when we decide that every person, Every single person deserves to be seen, valued, and loved. If you believe that matters, if you believe that's the kind of world you want to live in, then I need you to do more than just watch this video. Subscribe to this channel so we can keep telling stories that challenge us to be better. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. And most importantly, go out into your life and practice what Victoria learned. See people, all people, and treat them the way you'd want to be treated if your positions were reversed. Thank you for watching. Thank you for caring. And remember, the way we treat the people we have power over says everything about who we really are. I'll see you in the next story. Until then, choose kindness, choose dignity, choose love.